IVM.
Welcome to Absolutely Right. I'm your host Aditi Surana. Our guest today is one of my favorite sculptors, Arzan Khambata. Arzan is an architect by profession and passionate sculptor by choice. He looks for his inspiration in everyday life and creates some mesmerizing sculptures and installations. When he began his journey in 1983, he used to collect metal scrap to create his art pieces. And as they were sculptures created out of scrap, he called them scraptures. Besides sculpting, his interests lie in doodling and filmmaking. His first film, titled Decibel, is based on a wacky view of noise pollution in Bombay City. On this episode of Absolutely Right, we will speak about what keeps an artist going. How did he survive the lockdown without his tools and studio? What his handwriting reveals about his work style? And Arzan's advice to anyone who would like to explore a career in art. Pablo Picasso once said, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once you grow up." Every time I speak with Arzan, his childlike curiosity to explore the unknown stands out. He is definitely the child who has survived the adulting process. While recording this episode, the internet connection wasn't at its best, so some parts are distorted. We have tried our best to correct it, so please bear with us. Arzan will join us on the other side of this short break. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. So, a great week of shows behind us, and hope that you've been catching up on as much of it as you can. We had Abhishek Bachchan on Football Shitball. Yeah, let me say that again. Abhishek Bachchan was on Football Shitball. Did I mention Abhishek Bachchan was on Football Shitball? That was a fun episode. You should definitely check that out. Really, really deep conversation about cricket and things like that. We had Vikram Kochar on Cyrus Says, talking about the platforms and stuff like what's going on over there. On the note, Maruk had spoken to Sanjay Jha, which was again a really, really interesting conversation. On Edges and Sledges, the guys are having an interesting conversation about, well, what are our favorite formats of cricket and things like that. So it's just really been a really, really awesome week on the network, and please do check things out. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Hi, Arzan.
Hi, Aditi.
I'm so excited to have you here. Also because we have been speaking almost every week.
Correct.
Correct. Willing to talk about all of that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being on the show.
Pleasure. Absolutely pleasure.
Arzan, tell us, what is your inspiration as an artist to take this career?
So basically, I'll tell you what, it's so difficult to identify what your inspiration is while working. If you see my work, it's so varied. It just flows from figures to abstract to stuff that is just got out of anywhere. And so I feel that when you're living in a city like Mumbai, everything in that city acts upon you. The chaos of the city, when you're walking on the road, when you're sidestepping, when you see people standing there, when you see a little boy feeding a dog or someone standing on a balcony, and everything around you, the signages, everything that engulfs you in an environment is my inspiration. So I always say, I think Bombay is my biggest inspiration, the noise, the chaos and everything. So I think all my subjects have been derived from that. It's not that I do a lot of horse heads as well. It doesn't mean that I see a lot of horses in Bombay, but there's something about the fast galloping pace of the city. Everything that sort of acts you. Sometimes you can't pinpoint where it started from, but definitely the city as a whole is my main inspiration, I would say.
So you're brought up in Parsi Colony, is it?
Absolutely, yes. Brought up in Parsi Colony, yeah.
I am brought up in Badala, and I studied in school called IES. I really passed Parsi Colony.
Yes, of course, correct.
I'm fascinated by all Parsis who never changed. Like
yes.
You saw them like when you're in 5th standard, they looked like same people living the same lifestyle.
Yeah.
On the contrary, in that really, really monotonous kind of a setting, I don't think anything about you or your collection or your work has been similar to what you did in the past. So how did you manage to survive as a child to be this erratic in that setting?
So basically, I tried on that. I tried to be different. And I think it was something in me to do something different than no one had done. I think that was my driving force. And I got a lot of brickbats from a lot of old Parsis in the colony who used to pull me up and say, what are you doing? Your dad's a big architect, you studied architecture, but yet you're not sitting in his office and you're welding junk and scrap together and stuff like that. And all these sort of comments used to only trigger me more to work that way. And I used to sit in the studio from literally morning to night in that little room that I had in the colony itself and weld away like crazy. I would just keep on welding, and there's this powerful light which welding emits, and everyone would see that they think I've gone crazy because I used to weld day in and day out, carry scrap, move through the colony completely filthy with oil and muck and stuff on that like that. And to me, the dirtier I got at the end of the day, the more it made me happy because I knew I had worked that much. So I used to walk with tremendous pride on the streets in that dirt because I used to love it, and I know I had achieved something as to what I wanted to do, and that just carried on from one to the other.
Like a battle scar, you had like the battle.
Correct. Every day. Yeah. True.
So I'm going to patch in the listeners on this note that I remember coming to your studio and seeing your setup, and I know how you keep carrying every broken thing that can be used in your art.
True.
But tell us more about it, because I'm sure people are not aware. They think when you create art, it's like this, beautiful, very, very creative space. Unlike the studio where you are filled with all the raw material required to create anything out of anything.
True.
More about it, and also refer to the Shiva sculpture where he's doing Tanda, which is
correct.
Please tell us about it.
So basically, I started in 82 plainly using machine scrap. Machines used to fascinate me a lot.
Okay.
These geared wheels and propeller shafts and chains and stuff like that. All this heavy metal somehow fascinated me. I can't explain why, but it just I just drew to it. A broken bulldozer, I would stare at it for hours. At that time, we didn't have phones with cameras to collect data like that. So I would sketch it and all that. And then I started collecting the scrap and making sense from the scrap itself. Like the pieces of the scrap itself would tell a story.
Right.
So it's like this carpenter's vice that I have, what you use to hold blocks of wood together. It broke, and then I found out that one part of it looked like the father, one part of it looked like the mother, and there were three parts which came from it which looked like three tiny children. So I made a sculpture called Father and Mother with Triplets. It's a family portrait with triplets. And I used to play around with it. So many times the machines used to tell me what to do. So I keep saying this, but this washer, what you use to fix nuts and bolts together, that looked like a Mexican sombrero to me. Okay. So I started making a Mexican sombrero. Then I made a little face under it. And then a little poncho out. This fellow is looking too stark alone. So then I made him sit on a little mule. I gave the side baskets as they go to the bazaar, the side baskets that the mule that. And then he looked too alone. So I put one more person at the back with the sombrero. So I used to actually, I would say, talk with the metal, literally converse with the metal, find out what the shapes meant, and then keep on creating, And like you said, you stepped into my studio. It's people call it the Aladdin's cave because it's got so many things to look at. And one thing is that, of course, when you see an artist studio, since I'm not a painter and I work with metal, the whole studio looks like an industrial godown because that's the kind of machinery I need to make my sculptures. So by my studio, you will find closer to a fabricator's workshop than an artist studio. But it's what you see around that makes it into an artist studio. My unfinished pieces, the skeletons, the sketches, or my cabin, which is my favorite space where I've got all your collectible things from all over the world. I've got stones which I've collected. And the best part is that every little thing has a story. So when I walk in there, I'm in the studio, I'm in my complete comfort zone. There is one place where no one tells me what to do except in the house, you're guided by this room, that room, this room, and others. But in the studio, it's only me. So it's a wonderful space to be in.
So when we look at today, there are many international artists who do this kind of work. They take scrap and they create it. But you had no access to internet for sure. You had no reference to look at something like this. So it was completely original. It wasn't even inspired by others. It was completely original.
Yes.
So how did you establish that idea or took it that as your career option?
So number one, it became a career by accident. It wasn't an option. It started totally as a hobby, as you know. It started completely as a hobby. And like I said, it's unexplainable passion. It's crazy. Like right now, if I look back, I say, how the hell did I work like that? You know, what made me sort of go around all over Bombay to scrapyard, construction sites, collecting them. I mean, I can't imagine doing it now. But it must have been such a frenzy at that time to take these things and weld and create. And I worked my backside out during that time. Of course, my college education suffered because of that and everything. But I didn't give a damn. I just wanted to create stuff from metal. And like you said, I didn't take it from anywhere. I knew that scrap metal in USA was being used as a medium of modern art in some places. It was. And that time we had access to very few books and all that. The net was not there, nothing. But there was a sculptor in Bombay who I had never met. He had passed away by the time I came to know about him. A sculptor called Adi Davirwala. Okay. And he used to do scrap metal sculpture. One of the most versatile sculptors that we had. He used to work in scrap metal, in new metal, in bronze casting, in plastic perspex. He used to carve wood and carve stone. Wow. Can you imagine? Wow. And phenomenal. And I know it for a fact that he never had a single assistant or a helper. He would do everything himself, whether the piece was 2 feet or 18 feet tall. And his works can be seen at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research and the Homi Bhabha Institute. Phenomenal works of his. And I saw his studio, and I knew that my love for machines can be combined with my art if I take the machines apart and try to make sense from them and sort of make stuff, you know. So that was one big inspiration for me. And like I said, it was not done before, so all the more inspiring for me. Right. You know, it's so funny. I'm sure it must be happening to you. A client calls you and says, I want to get this done. Have you done this before? I said, no, I've not done this before, but that's why I want to do it. You know, but why should you have an experience in everything that you know, it's like crazy. Someone wanted, I remember Mashals once for his bungalow in Goa. 5-foot mashals which was spewing actual fire. Have you done this before? I said, naturally, I'm not. Who will want 5 feet mashals where it's not not something on my list that I've done and all that. I said, I've not done it. That's why I would love to do it. But that's how I jumped into it, studied everything, the gas pipes and how the fire would go and how the fire would look and all that. The work didn't come to me. That's besides the point. But it's just that the need to do something that has not been done. That is what drives me even today. Yeah.
I totally agree and relate to this incessant need to just explore your work. Initially, when I started analyzing handwriting, I would go to shops and go to anywhere and everywhere possible and look at people as handwriting sample or sources that they can give me handwriting samples.
Correct.
Once I was walking on the road and a guy was wearing a t-shirt with multiple signature autographs of all people. And I tried following this person, and my friend had to almost stop me. Like, what are you doing? Where are you going? I mean, no.
It's compulsory. I mean, I've gone around and I've picked up things from the road. My friends are saying, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "This is an interesting piece. Let me pick it up. It will come in use." You know. So my friends used to make a lot of fun of me in KC College when I was there. When I was sculpting that time, day in and day out, they used to make a lot of fun of. They used to come to the studio. You know?
Also the sense of feeling that slight secret pride.
Of course.
You have no clue what I can create out of this.
Correct. True. Yeah. So, and then, of course, they weren't laughing because just 1 or 2 years after starting out, the speeches started to sell. So then they stopped laughing.
So when somebody is making such choices or thinking about careers that are not looked at, I would not say with respect, but you don't have enough qualification, you don't have enough support, you don't have enough data to prove or to even claim that one day you can make something out of it.
Correct.
What were the moments of feeling confused, lost? How did you deal with that phase in your life?
I think number one, Aditya, I came from a good family, which is a very big help. I mean, if I was struggling to sort of survive or something, I don't know what I would have done. And that's what I find with so many artists today. The first thing they think about is money. That also is wrong. However, in whatever situation, you have to first start creating and then sort of think a little better. So I was not hard and fast pushed to a corner that if this doesn't work, so what? I was very lucky in that way. Okay. So the doubt whether this would work or not, believe me, was never there. Because I was so crazy into it. And just 1 year into working at it, my pieces that I used to get home, and Dad's an architect. Right. He used to have his architect friends over, naturally, for dinner or whatever. They would see it, and it was not because they were my friends that they would like it, but they would give me genuine feedback to it. A couple of them bought a couple of my pieces. So that's when I knew that this is lucrative. And immediately, not even 4 years into doing this as a hobby, architect Naushad Talati called me one day. And Naushad Talati, even now and then, was a huge name. And to be called by him was like, I was like on cloud 9. He said, make this piece for me outside Jewel of India. 9-foot piece he wanted. And even the 9-foot piece, I remember I made single-handedly because I didn't have anyone. It was a hobby till then. So I knew there was never a doubt that I would not be able to survive with this because I was gung-ho about it. And I was so convinced I didn't even want to study further. Yeah. I didn't want to study further. I said, I just want to weld in and out. And Dad and Mom said, nothing doing. You get a degree, you get something. That's how I went into architecture. Okay. So 82, I started sculpting. 86
for our comfort, not your comfort.
Correct. Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah, but I'm very glad I did architecture because it was the first time that I felt I was doing something which was close to me. A 3D art. Architecture is also 3D art. And before that, I mean, things like chemistry and biology and all, I just couldn't. And maths, forget. Maths is the other side down. Numbers, till today, if you show me numbers, I'll get completely foxed. I cannot understand numbers. Right. So this is the first time actually I was in college, and it's so important, because I was forever being punished, ridiculed by teachers because I was academically, I was bad. I mean, it was a known fact. My textbooks used to be full of sketches. My notebooks used to be full of sketches. Mostly caricatures of the teachers themselves, so that would make them more angry. So stuff like that. I had a maths paper in which I didn't know anything, so I drew a tree and myself hanging from it like that from a noose. Stuff like that. And I never used to give a damn. I don't know where this came from, but I never used to give a damn because I knew I couldn't deal with numbers and all that. So it was so certain. That's what I'm saying. It was so certain. This visual language, I knew I could master and I could take it forward to another level. And touch wood, that's what happened. Gradually just grew. And I went along, never left it. I mean, till now, you go to the studio and my thing is I have to do something which I've not done yesterday. So that is the aim, of course, you've got ups and downs, you've got good days and bad days, but that challenge should be within you, which is touch wood still there. The spirit of experimentation is still there, which keeps on driving me, Yeah. So that way.
So when the lockdown started and you could not go to the studio, you reinvented yourself by teaching people your lifelong pursuit. I would not even say passion because passion is pursuit of doodling and creating, work out of pen strokes. So please tell us how doodling works. Like my personal interest lies in this because I've been analyzing doodles and handwriting.
Yeah.
But then tell listeners about this, like how.
So I started. I'll tell you how I started doodling. In 2011, 2012. Mom fell very ill. She had a brain hemorrhage. Okay, and she went into a coma and all that stuff. And all three of us, my siblings, not dad, we used to keep dad away at home. Three of us used to sit at the hospital continuously. Someone or the other had to be with her. That's the rule we had made. And I spent such a long time there, and there was no Netflix there. There was nothing which you could sort of do. I had this small book, which I still keep on showing you, the small red book. And I remember on way to the hospital, I picked up these pens. And I said, let me do something. That's how I started. Detail. Because I had time on my hands. Right. I couldn't do anything after sitting there except do something like this. I mean, you can listen to music, but it just gets monotonous, So I used to take these things, my sketchbooks, my little iPad where without the net and all that, stuff like that. And that's how I started drawing. And I realized that it has the capacity to completely engulf you. It has the capacity to completely take you in the paper and sort of forget what is around, And I have this, I don't know if I told you last time, but this thing about meditation. They say, I see someone sitting in the lawn below in my garden. And the common thing about meditation is, what do I tell you? Empty your mind. Right. Try emptying your mind. How can you empty your mind? The moment you empty your mind, such nonsense thoughts will come in your mind. Your meditation is going to go for a toss. So to me, meditation means doing something which takes your mind off the things that you're not supposed to be applying there. Like sometimes you're feeling a little unnervy, sometimes you're feeling a little anxious. I don't like going to work. I don't like going for the meeting. You jump into that work, you jump into that meeting. When you come out, you realize you've forgotten what you were feeling.
Right.
So that to me is meditation, and doodling and all that. I mean, I've taught you all so many things, but it can completely engulf you. I mean, I have worked on a single page, like 6 inches by 3 inches page, for something like 8 days continuously in the same details and all that, So it just takes you in. It interests you, it takes you in. And it sort of has the capacity to cut you out from the world. It's like a musician who's doing riyaz, I guess. Once they get engulfed in it, they get mesmerized with their own sound, and it just takes you in. So it's one of the forms of meditation. And I felt if I'm not able to do my sculpture workshops at the studio, let me do this. But this started not immediately during the lockdown, because as the lockdown started, I had other duties. I was cleaning ceiling fans, I was cleaning vessels, I was cleaning under sofas, I was cleaning cupboards, I was doing all that. And my daughter said, and I was doing these doodles for myself. Right. My daughter was in USA at that time, now she's here. She told me, said, what are you doing? He said, just do these Insta live classes and go. And there's so many people who will be interested. And that's how the whole thing started,
And that's amazing. Like I feel, my father was an art director, and I always saw him do something like this. But he was very, very strict as a person. So, how you associate certain characteristics. So, art was my dad's strict thing to do. So, every time we sat next to him doing any art, he just corrected us with so much of
okay.
I never wanted to go close to it.
Yeah, true.
All these years, I always felt the desire to express on the paper. When I started attending your classes, something very interesting happened. You said you don't have to finish your work. You pick one and you let it be, and it will tell you what to do next.
Correct.
So that freedom of figuring out 2-3 things simultaneously also helps me as a dyslexic that I am. I don't have to commit to an idea completely.
True.
I have the expression and the mind to go wherever it wants to. It has been really helpful, and I'm enjoying myself so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. But you've been doing fabulous work. I've been seeing your work, and I don't say it just like that. Conceptually, your drawings are very, very strong. They're superb. I love them.
Thank you.
Very nice.
I'm really looking forward to take this forward.
Sure.
So, Arzan, coming to the question of absolutely right, what would you like to talk to? Like, what would you like to ask me based on your handwriting sample?
Okay. So, based on, let's see. What do I hate? What do I detest the most? Let's see. What sort of usually people judge me, and you've seen me. I get angry very rarely. Okay, I get upset. I get hurt very badly. I get angry very rarely. What gets me angry? Let's see if you can make up from that.
Sure.
What gets me annoyed? What gets me ticked?
I feel if people genuinely, and I'm saying this like, other things you're very, very tolerant about, and also as a person, you're clear about what you want and what you don't want. So you don't have a lot of complicated expectations from people.
True.
So that is not your problem. So you would get irritated if somebody says and they don't do it, and you're like, but why didn't you do it? So that irritation. But if somebody genuinely breaks your trust, that is your point of view.
True.
Like, that is the only thing. If you say
correct,
it's down to you, and if you said it matters to you, and
yes.
And there are moments where you release your sense of being in control because you trust the other person.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
And when that person fails you,
yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And one of the small things that irritate me, and people know me by that, is my punctuality. I am over punctual. And so I know some people who say, "Oh, you're an artist. You'll come at whatever time for a meeting." I said, "Nothing doing. I'll be there on the dot. If you tell me to call at this time, I'll call." So it's my work line is very defined and very, very professional. That way. So
I feel one of the things that is amazing about you, and I've seen your work from the time I met you till now. I've been following you and admiring what you do. I feel one of the things you do is you show up every day.
Yeah.
Many artists or many creative professionals do not do. Like they feel they have this inborn talent, and then they would, call upon it, and when the assignment and project is in front of them, and it will work. But that's not true. Like you have to be there, and you have to show.
Yes.
That's how your craft starts trusting you.
Correct. True. True. Yeah.
And I'm feeling that, like, no matter in small or big ways, keep showing up. So tell us more about that. I think that's
so basically, I have these couple of beliefs. Okay. So
punctuality being one of them.
Sorry, yeah, punctuality being one. Completely. Like I know some very big clients of mine, and I walk into his cabin literally on the dot, and he said, "I can set my watch at the still the time that go." So I love doing that. And another thing I do is stick to deadlines.
Yeah.
When I promise a piece, I stick to deadlines. Of course, very unusually, sometime or the other, if some wayward incident happens. Otherwise, I stick to my deadlines completely. But you'll be surprised that as an architect, I work with so many architects. There's one architect who told me, go to this client and all that, but don't give them a timeline. You do it in your own sort of time. I said, don't tell me that. I said, the moment you tell an artist that, he's all over the place to me. I know I've got infinite amount of time to create this, so you go all over the place. You have to set a deadline.
I'm going to pause you here. This is so interesting. Yeah. When I look at your handwriting, there's a trait where the small letter T, the lowercase letter T, if you cut it halfway, like a plus sign, if that horizontal line is halfway, that makes you an end result oriented person.
Okay.
You do have that T. And what you're describing is exactly that behavior. You're like, I need a deadline. Give me where is my result?
Yeah.
How much more complicated it is, you tell me what the result looks like, and I will work towards it.
Yeah. So I like being bound by timelines and all that, so that then you can apply your mind in a way that it is limited. You don't go all over the place, because I do so many things together. I literally do so many things. I'm doing a lot of work with NGOs. I'm conducting workshops right now. I'm counseling IB art children as to what to do and all that. There are people who come to me and say, talk to my child, he's not doing anything, and just speak about inspire him and so and so.
Beside cleaning the ceiling fans?
Oh, everything. I'm telling you, besides doing that, yes, besides cleaning ceiling fans, since past 3 or 4 days, I go to a studio now. I go to a studio just about 1 or 2 hours, and I started cleaning the studio single-handedly. I said, let me clean. I just go there. I don't have anything to do right now. So, it's been shut for such a long time. I'm only cleaning like crazy. I am 2 masks and a shield and gloves and this and that, and I'm cleaning the studio. So it's wonderful to me. It's my own space. It's good fun.
Your hands dirty again, so that battle.
Yeah, true.
So when we look at artist handwritings and signature, there's always this. I have found the intuitive and creative and non-structured kind of flow in it. I don't see that in your writing, but I do see that in your signature. The signature has that flourishing lines, whereas your handwriting is very structured and very methodical, with a contrast. And signature is what is your public images. When you have that contrast, it's so beautiful to see how that has manifested as your style, right? As a person, when people look at you, they look at you as this creative person who can bring in ideas out of anything, which you are. But when it comes down to bringing that idea into actual work, you break it into a project, you make sure you have timelines and you have detailing and everything. Also with architectural, principles in place, because a lot of your work is like tilting, it looks like
they're moving, they're balanced. Yes.
Balance is perfectly maintained. So there's a lot of time that goes in that creative aspect.
Correct. True.
That's so interesting. Like, it's always
thank you.
Which were your monumental works for you?
The large ones? Sorry. What was your question again?
Let me rephrase. Not monumental in terms of size, but which pieces that you did that were very, very close to you.
Okay, I'll tell you. So this was in 1996 in my exhibition at the Jahangir Art Gallery. I love working with science, with balances and stuff like that. So if you know, I've done like 27 footers which balance on one toe, one little toe which is 6 inches by 4 inches. Visually, I take the structure inside and all that. Not a big deal, not a very big deal. It just comes naturally to me visually. Yeah, it comes. And so, but I have a very funny story about that also. But what happens is, now coming to the first to answer your question about the monumental stuff, decided to do an optical illusion piece for the first time. I said, let me do that. So what I did was I actually worked through a peephole. I worked through a peephole by the principle that if you close your one eye, you destroy your depth of vision. So whatever you see, it all comes together. So I did this huge piece, which was about 12 feet tall, which had very abstract wood and chains and just some metal flying around on it. A nice thin rod with stuff like that. You couldn't make out. It looked like an abstract piece just standing in the air. But then I had a small little mirror there at 45 degrees and a peephole. So when you look through the peephole, it directs your view upwards and you see the whole crucifix hanging, Christ hanging on the cross. And it came out so beautifully. And I love seeing the reactions of people. That's something I love. And believe me, seriously, whether they hate them or love them, I don't care. I just love personal reactions. Yeah, I just love it. I don't mind someone coming and telling me, what rubbish have you done? But I love that reaction. Instead of someone looking at it and just going away, I would like it if there's some reaction. So it was wonderful. I would sit far and I would see, and people would look through that peephole, see it, and then they would come out and try to find where's that image. Again, go there and see it, and again try to come out and find. But I had done it through a peephole so that everything sort of lined up into that image, So that's one of my favorite pieces. That is, I'm very proud to say that is with Mr. Naushad Talati, architect Naushad Talati, in his house as one of his main pieces. Okay, and the other one was because of the connection that was INS Vikrant, the memorial that I did for INS Vikrant from the scrap of the Vikrant itself. So when the government decided to literally destroy it and sell it off, literally per kg, it was sold off as the weight of iron. The fighter pilots that flew from the decks of the Vikrant came to me, headed by Captain Midyoma Bada, Commander Midyoma Bada, Commodore Midyoma Bada. And he said that, Arzan, let's go to the scrapyard. We have decided to pool in our money. The fighter pilots, can you imagine? Their pays must have been nothing. They decided to pool in their money, buy scrap. They gave it to me and I made the monument for them out there at cost. I did it at very, very less because it was a huge thing. And we just got together. And the thing is, how they felt for it. This is something we ignore so badly. Our special forces, everyone, they are so badly ignored. These fellows actually have our country in their hearts, And they felt like crying. He said when we used to go out and on in the plane and come back to the mothership, they would feel that they've come back to their mother. He said the first thing they would do is shower and sit in the mess and have a warm cup of soup and all that. He said it looked as if they felt as if they were being sort of, enfolded by their mother. He said that was our mothership, And he said such a sad thing that is broken, but now it's out there as a monument, So that made them very happy. So that was a very special connection for me.
So I feel that about all the artists, and I want to ask this question about the emotions and the art. So when you invest so much of time and energy in creating something, and it's a journey, it's not a one-time thing. It's
correct.
Some pieces take a long time to create. When you sell it or when you give it away, is it like a part of you going away? Like how does that work?
Oh, superb. That's a brilliant question you asked. So of course I know I have to sell. That's the way I survive now. It's my only livelihood. But very interesting. I'm very particular about who it goes to.
Really?
Yeah. I'm very particular. There are clients I have walked away from and saying nothing doing. I'm not going to work for you.
Deserve my piece.
Sorry, sir. Literally, I'm not joking. I have walked away. I have walked away from some clients who have just no idea of what I've been called to site for. The architect is there. The architect is trying to explain what I'm going to do. When I show them my works, stupid stuff like, how will this look in my house? Arey, Baba, that's not for you. They don't even understand about me trying to understand the client. I go into a lot of detail, whether it's a small 6-inch piece for a residence or a 20-footer for a corporate. I get to know what the client is about, what his likes are, dislikes are, what will go well in that environment, what materials will work, what will not work. It all comes now like a flash, it comes after so many years of practice.
There's a process behind it for you.
Yes, there's a process behind it, but it comes out, now it collects and comes out, So, and people who don't understand, I don't like working for. So, now was coming to my first show in 93. Yeah. 1993, I had my first show where I started sculpting in 82. Okay. So 11 years of work, whatever I had got and put at my parents' house, I collected in a car and I put it in the exhibition at Jahangir Art Gallery. Okay, that was my first show in 93. And believe it or not, my prices at that time started from 700 rupees to maximum 25,000 rupees. 25,000 was like
93.
93.
For the first show, definitely.
For the first show. And I know the architect Ratan Patli Boy, who I know very well now, he bought 3 pieces from me. He bought 3 pieces. I completely can relate to what you're asking. When the last day came and people came and started picking away the pieces, my face fell. And Kushnuma saw me, he said, what happened? I said, they're taking it away. He said, naturally they're taking it away. They bought it. I said, bloody hell, the whole place was empty except for a few pieces which I still got at my dad's house, which are my first pieces and all which are out there. I remember handing that a small torso which Ratan has on his table right now. I was giving it to him and he said, Arzan, you need to let go. And I was actually holding it. I was not giving it to him. I said, Arzan, he said, you'll have to leave it so I can take it. I said, take it. You know? And I was like very sad the first time when I sold the pieces. But then, now, I mean, the commission pieces, where they go, believe it or not, Aditi, except for maybe 1 or maximum 2 clients till date in my entire career, each and every client of mine is a friend of mine now. So even before the piece is over, I get so close to them. They've become good friends, not just friends, good friends. I have an 80-year-old dearest friend of mine in Pedder Road who calls me every time for my birthday. He has to have a lunch with me and on my anniversary, and he still keeps in touch. And it started with what? One railing that I designed for him. You know, so it is that what I cherish very much. So to me, if the person is not proper, to hell with it. I go away and I don't come back. I don't want to deal with it. And it's nothing to do with the payment. It's nothing to do with the payment. It's to do with that person and how I sort of relate to it. You know.
Also, I feel like many times it's about playing along and you know, it's like the dancing relationship. You don't know the rules, figure it out on the dance floor with
of course. I mean, you've got, as I said, touch wood. I mean, brilliant clients all through. I've been so lucky that way. Brilliant clients all through, and people who I know, who I can call up anytime. If I've done and work out of town, and if I've gone for another meeting and I have time, I tell that person, "Oh, I'm coming to see my sculpture." I said, "How is it?" So he said, yeah, come over. So that's the kind of relationship I've got. You know, I can literally walk in and see any piece of mine anytime. You know,
it's so amazing. It's so amazing to know that, you know, like every time I speak with you or interact in whichever form, there's this genuine commitment to movement and this childlike enthusiasm, which is endearing always.
That childlike enthusiasm, 100% I would say that is what drives me completely. That is what you won't believe it. I'm not joking. Seriously, I get excited when I see a plane flying. And I was with the artist. He said, "What are you? Are you a small child?" I said, "Look, no." I said, "So close it's going." He said, "You're mad." He said, "You're getting excited with a plane fly." And literally that happens to me. I mean, I love it. You know, I mean, all these small things.
How lucky are you? Because people in the rigmarole of going about life forget about these small things.
Yeah. So I love it.
You're speaking about like observing people, dogs, somebody feeding. You know, I feel as a person, I always looked at these moments, and my favorite pastime is to watch people. Creepy as it may sound, and
no, it is. It is
observing the micro expressions.
Yeah.
Before they speak, how their body and their
correct
becomes. All of that becomes part of the study.
Yeah. Of course.
So for you, also, like, it's curiosity to move on.
And I mean, one of the best things that I like about Europe is you can sit out in a cafe and look at hundreds of people. Hundreds of people. You know, it's like they say, you know, watching the world go by. That's what you do in a Parisian cafe. You sit there and you just see a whole tableau unfolding in front of you, you know. Where I mean, if you go in a good climate, the sun is bright, it's nice and cold. I mean, not uncomfortably cold, but it's cool. You have your coffee, and there are these just colors and everything floating around you. You know, it's wonderful just to see people. You know, and I mean, I'm sure you've noticed in different cities, people look different. The pace is different. You know,
completely. And
in New York, you have this thud, and in some other places you have it very nice and low. And you walk through a village in Germany sometimes, and you just see these people lying around. I mean, I've been to Karnataka in Hampi where you see people reacting differently. You go to a city like Bangalore, you find people reacting differently. And everywhere, and of course, it's a known fact, the bigger the city, the people have lost their aura, they've lost their being. They get engulfed in the city life and lose certain things, That's why we need vacations.
Yeah, especially now. After
You bet. This virus has put us on a permanent vacation right now.
Yeah, but all people watching is all our family members and probably the birds outside. That's all we get to do now.
Yeah, true.
Arzan, which was your favorite failure?
I'll tell you what. Yes. Okay. That's good. Very good question. So there is seldom I've done a sculpture where I've been called. I give sketches. If I'm called for a commission sculpture, it's a huge piece. Naturally, you have to give sketches to your clients.
Right.
There have been some clients who have said, "Don't give me a sketch. You create whatever you want."
Right.
Now that puts tremendous load on you, but it's damn good fun because then you have to prove yourself 100 times more. Okay, I did it once and it worked brilliantly well. I mean, they loved it and they hadn't even seen the sketch or anything. Right. Just showed me the space, designed for it, I put it, and everyone loved it, and it's still hanging there. Right. I tried it another time, and I put it there. The client came. He said, "What is this?" He said, "I don't like it. This is not what I had in mind." But he told me not to show me a sketch.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, there is no way I will say, "You told me this, so now you have to take it." There is no way. I removed it then and there. I removed it and took it back to the studio. And believe me, it's one of my finest pieces. It's absolutely one of my finest pieces. And I was lucky that within 10 days, the gallery I was dealing with managed to give it to a finance company in Singapore. Same size, just fit there directly. And would you believe the title of the sculpture was absolutely in tune with the name of his company. It just fit there. So probably it was actually meant for him.
Wow.
So it happens like that, So it does happen like that. Yeah.
That makes sense. But how did you deal with it when you knew that they don't like it and you have to redo the whole process?
I was very frankly, I was okay. First thing was to remove it from there because I didn't want everyone to see it and keep on criticizing it as to, why is this here? I mean, it's a different thing that you put it out, people criticize. I'm okay with criticism and all that. But them not wanting it there was a major issue for me.
You didn't want the piece to hear that?
No, I just wanted it to come back. I said, remove it then and there. Tomorrow is nothing doing. I said, don't like it, but get it out right now. And we had spent 2 days fitting it. We took 1 day to remove it. It was a laborious process. I had nothing doing. Just remove it out and take it to the studio. After that story ended there, I said, then we'll see what happens, So it's like, I don't want to displease anyone with my pieces, So, I mean, I'm doing it for my pleasure. I'm doing it for their pleasure. I don't want something to hang somewhere and then people say, what the hell is this? So that was one. Besides that, like I said, 1 or 2 clients who I will not mention, but who I completely stay away from. Otherwise, that's what everything's okay. Everything's okay.
So, my last question for this conversation.
Sure.
When you feel stuck or creative block that we hear a lot of artists talk about. Now, what are your go-to mantras? What are your ways of going around it, figuring it out? What do you do?
Basically, like I said, I thrive on doing things which are not done. Yeah. And my one of my most interesting sayings is the impossible just takes a little longer. Okay, I love that. And people ask me where I heard it. So you won't believe it. There is a singer called Dr. Alban.
Okay.
Dr. Alban has a song called Africa. If you hear that song called Africa, he keeps on saying in the background, the impossible just takes a little longer. That just stuck in my head. And I've been using that ever since, And just so, I mean, just to give you an idea, the dolphins at Worli, I made that in 13 days.
What are you saying?
That sculpture was made in 13 days. It's just one of those things where everything came together. I had a 15-day deadline. Which I took up, and everyone around me thought I was mad because the client said, if it's not done in 15 days, finish, you keep it, yourself. I'm not even going to put it. So I took this up, and I don't know how it happened. It just happened. We got in more workers and stayed at the workshop. My kids were small. We used to sleep at the studio, people working in 3 shifts, and it just happened. So there's this, I'm known for jumping into things without knowing risks,
right.
So there's this, I said it in one of the classes, look before you leap. It no longer applies. You say you leap and then you look. Well, that's the way you work now, because there's so much competition. I mean, I'm talking about other stuff, not in mine, that people cannot think too long to start something. You have to just literally, start out and then see how it goes and figure out, jump in and then sort of find out. So that's what I do.
But now you're kind of sitting and you say, okay, that people should do or that one should do. But you always did that. You always jumped in and you figured it out.
Yeah. Always. I mean, I've been known for saying yes even before that person completes the sentence. I've been actually blamed for it. So, like someone calls me for a judging thing or something, and they're explaining, I say yes. He said, what? Yes, at least hear me out. I said, okay, fine. But I said, I'm okay. I'm accepting it. So it's like
lightning speed and half. Thank you so much, Arzan. This was
welcome
to hear your perspective on things, and also seeing that when we look at career choices, we look at really difficult problems and challenges. They did not be overwhelming. They can be playfully handled.
Oh, of course.
One step at a time. We
yes.
About it, but talking to you is like living that and experiencing it in every that you make. That's really, really amazing. Thank you so much for being on.
One thing. About what you do, what you've been doodling and creating.
Yes.
So I've been looking at it, and of course, there's 20 people on the group, but your pieces stand out because there's a lot of thought behind it.
Yes.
There's a lot of thought and there's a story behind it. Of course, I do my doodles just freely and all that. But what you've managed to do is you've managed to take the technique, sort of split it apart, and I see so much depth in your works. What you should do? You should frame all of these and put them properly as a story. At some point of time, they will actually read out to you what you've been trying to decipher at this time. It's wonderful. Very nice.
Thank you so much, because I have made this a rule. I do some doodling, and especially in this case, I also look at it like some art. Like I'm not only doing
of course, yes.
Throughout the day, I speak to so many people, and every person leaves some or other impression.
Correct.
What stays with me, I try to.
Yes.
I don't know the technique yet, but I try to get to that thought with it. But only commitment here is every day, minimum 15 minutes of doodling.
Okay. It's what you're talking about is exactly like what do you say, like a cardiogram machine, isn't it? You're reading that person, you have a pen in your hand, and then you're but your vibrations from him or her is making you do something on paper, Wonderful.
I'm looking forward to this journey. I'm doing all the classes that you're going to teach
Super.
August, and thank you so much for being here.
Welcome.
As always.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Impossible takes a little longer. I'm going to remember this and tell myself every time I hit a dead end. Arzan knows how to take up a challenge, question the norm, and execute his ideas. However, many people struggle to do that. Many people have great thoughts, amazing ideas, great inspirations, but they do not dare to take any action. This Friday, let's talk about procrastination. आज करे सो कल करे सो परसों, इतनी भी क्या जल्दी यारो, जीना है जब बरसों. Now that exact attitude gets us in trouble. Let's talk about procrastination and what exactly you can do to resolve it, to go beyond it, and execute no matter what. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Absolutely Right. I'm keen to know what were your takeaways from this conversation with Arzan. What small action will you be taking today to improve something in your life? Do share your experience and send me your questions on my Instagram handle @AditiSurana. If you like this podcast, then don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on IVM Network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are @IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Let's connect on Friday. Till then, happy writing!
Namaskar, this is Ashish Vidyarthi. Yes, my friend, these are challenging times, but in these challenging times, we can create something extraordinary. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on the IVM Podcast, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, we have a great opportunity called life. Cheers.
Hi guys, this is Ayushi.
And I am Ritasha.
And welcome to Agla Station Adulthood.
It's a fun podcast we've got going on, and we'd love for you to tune in and enjoy with us.
Join us as we stop at various stations and discuss different topics that seem to be bothering us and hopefully
Dating,
you as well.
relationships, beauty, just being an adult, lots of different things.
We don't have a great grip on it, but we've done okay so far.
Catch Agla Station Adulthood every Thursday on the IVM app, the IVM website, or wherever else you get your podcasts.